OOCS Into a Wider Galaxy, Part 166, The Buzz on the Spin. Everything started to happen all at once. The only warning was a flicker in the portals as something else began homing in on their signals. Then massive armored forms appear. The forces from Octaron, spin that had already come through the portals, react instantly. 652-3-5000's eyes widen as a Canador in red and blue power armor smashes into the dark gray and green of the mercenary. Shoulder-mounted plasma ignites and starts to power up. "No!" he shouts as he knows that kind of heat this close will flash, cook several brothers. A line of red traces through the air, growing wider as it moves. A beam of cutting light in the hands of Hoagie, moving too fast to be properly registered, as the plasma weapons are sheared through and an angry glowing line is left on the armor. 652-3-5000 then flinches back as a Gathera-sized rifle clatters against his chest, and he fumbles for it. It's a laser, precise and powerful. Hoagie can't be tracked normally, just followed with the wide trail of light he leaves behind as he zips from mercenary to mercenary, shearing down and cutting plasma weapons wherever he finds them, prioritizing the as-yet unmade cycle beyond anything else, beyond everything else. "You are not," a newly arrived mercenary says, and he swings the rifle at her in reflex. The weapon shatters like glass against it, and he backs away a step. The armored figure grabs at the overalls he's wearing before a beam of light extends from the side of its head to illuminate his bones and feathers, just in time for his left claw to scrape against it. "You cannot win." The trail of light returns and stops against the head of the mechanized armor and slowly starts to sink in Hoagie's grip. "You may be thermally shielded, but this is designed for starship hulls," Hoagie says as the outer layer of the armor begins to fail and the hull cutter starts to sink in. 10 seconds tops. He carves through the head entirely, and there's a scream as the back of the armor cracks open and a mass moves out in a single movement before recombining into a female figure as the slobe pilot of the mechanized armor reforms and then lashes out fast. Hoagie has already moved and gotten the hull cutter between them. The fist of the slobe splits before it can impact the hull cutter and slams into Hoagie in 2 locations to send him skidding back, deactivating his weapon so that it doesn't flail out and damage a pod. The slobe says nothing as she shifts around the pods too fast to easily track. 652-3-5000 watches in horror as he realizes the issue. His unformed brothers are hostages to the lass. They need to be moved out. Now he reaches the nearest pod and starts disengaging it from the hull. Before hefting it, it weighs 10 times what he does. But the power he calls to his muscles makes the burden bearable. "Brothers, bring the younger to safety. We cannot fight with them held hostage." There is movement as the living slime comes for him, but with her movement predictable, Hoagie grasps it and sends a brutal charge of electricity through her body. She screams and goes limp, unconscious or perhaps even dead. Hoagie pulls his hand out of the gel and flicks off the remains. He nods to 652-3-5000 and then reactivates his hull cutter before blurring away. He reappears, stabbing it into the chest of another suit of mechanized armor and lifting it off the ground with it as the pilot tries hard to escape before the hull cutter pierces through them. A Tret hits the floor bottom first before gathering herself and pulling out a coil pistol. The shot takes Hoagie in the gut, and he slams down the armor on her in reflex. He staggers back while holding his stomach. His armor had saved his life, but it hadn't been enough to fully stop the bullet at most 2 meters range. It had mostly stopped it, but he still had a small chunk of metal embedded in his gut. "That was a terrifying moment," Janet says. "Is that what made the day unusual?" Observer Wu asks. "One of the things. While my Daniel gets into a great deal of action, he rarely gets hurt. He moves too quickly, and generally his armor stops everything. And that's if his reputation or the swarm of berserkers with him don't get people to back down immediately." "And where were they at the time?" "Just showing up, actually," Sarconic says with a grin that can only be seen by a slight bunching of the paint on the left side of his face. There is a massive swell of buzzing and a scream of fury as numerous Charbies fly in. A few dozen surround Hoagie as he tries to assure them that he's fine. The armor took it, and it's just a bit of blood. But it's in vain as they sweep him out in a massive group, and the remainder start dive-bombing the incoming mercenaries with stabbing knives, cutting torches and chains to lock them up and down. At this point, numerous mercenaries are on the retreat and warping out. But those that do so cover it, i.e. an angry bee women, bring them with them. At this point, I have to confess, I don't have much information beyond the fact that the mercenaries who were recalled to their ships ended up just making the problems much, much worse because the Charby could then start openly using their weapons without risking any hostages. 2 gunships went down in the end, but from my understanding, the girls used little beacons on themselves to swarm the things. All but those that were getting hoagie to a medical bay were rushing the mercenaries, and the sheer weight of fire they brought to bear swarmed over them all. What happened to the ships? Torn apart for parts, of course, hearing how the gunships were being counterboarded galvanized the mercenaries, and of course, the news that they were using the unborn men provoked the rest of the station. They were already almost entirely on our side due to the fact that me and my brothers had won our freedom with blood and death. All peoples respect something in some way. And in places like this, the will to be free is respected. So that led to Octar Spin fully mobilizing, every single sector showing exactly why they are not to be toyed with. The central battleship was under massive bombardment in moments. The remaining 8 gunships were quickly boarded as their logistics ship had the greediest women from Sector 5 rushing in to loot everything that isn't bolted down, rip out everything that is bolted down, and then take the bolts for good measure too. Of course, Observer Wu says with a slight grin, despite himself. Bring them to shelter, sisters, lest they never have the chance to bless our beloved galaxy with life anew. A small crusade of the gravid faith was marching through the cargo vessels and setting up interlocking shield walls and protecting the engineering crew as they removed the pods. Commodore Snarlmane had tried contacting the station again, but a chitin-covered black hand had reached down from above and pulled her bodily away. 2 gunships had gone silent, a third was reduced to slag under massive bombardment, and a third and fourth were shorting out. The remaining 3 vessels were on full retreat, but the Gathera ships were in pursuit and laying in a massive bombardment of lasers, plasma, and the occasional rail shot to follow them to the Axiom lane. They get winged and damaged, but are allowed to leave as a warning to anyone else that thinks a stunt like this is wise around Octar Spin. Remarkable. So what happened to those taken prisoner? There weren't that many. Mercenaries rarely surrender or are given the chance to. These were no exception. Sarconic says. One could argue the adjustment that followed was harder. Clothing for us all, learning to move beyond the simple things we're programmed to be when we lie within our pods. What were you taught within the pod? I'm struggling to understand why a large group of transparent men of enormous stature would be in mass demand beyond military applications, or perhaps policing. But the fact your instinct with a rifle was to swing it like a club rather than fire, it tells me that you weren't intended to be a fighter. Observer Wu states, and Sarconic nods. You're right. We weren't ready for violence. We were made to be art pieces. We weren't given the full information as to who our funder, the customer, whoever she was, she wanted to look good. Every brother and myself came out of our pods knowing how to keep ourselves in shape, how to pose, and how to paint ourselves artistically, Sarconic says. What I'm using now is considered ultra-minimalist, just a series of lines to outline where I am. Wearing this kind of paint is downright compulsive. So someone poured what must have been potentially millions of not billions into making 20,000 large burly men who are invisible but compelled to highlight themselves with body paint? Yes. And when the men escaped, they sent a mercenary force after them? Observer Wu asks in an incredulous tone. Yes. Quite the day. It wasn't over, though, Janet says. It wasn't? It was barely time for lunch, and my son had been shot in the stomach, helped rescue many thousands of men, and fight back an enemy fleet. He had healed up and escaped the medics within the hour, and was back to things. Seeing to it that the Gathara men were good and situated was one issue, and seeing to the captured mercenaries was another. Not all were killed straight out after all. Janet explains, and Sarconic checks his communicator before letting out a hum. That's right, I'm out of time. I'll be heading out now. Sarconic notes as he deactivates the stasis on the frozen cup of coffee and then picks up the whole thing. If I don't head home and head to bed now, I'll never wake up in time for what's up after. Then he bites a chunk out of the mug and ice underneath, and there's an accompanying crunching and munching sound for a few moments as he finishes off the entire thing in 3 bites with appropriate chewing. Delicious as always. You know where to get the best dishes. Sarconic notes before tossing the last piece of the handle in his mouth and chewing. Where's my tab at? You're well paid off. Get moving before the cold drops you in the street. Janet says kindly, and Sarconic lets out a deep yawn before reaching for something sewn into his jacket, then vanishing in a teleport. Did I just miss someone? Hoagie asked, coming back in. You're back. What was happening? Smuggler standoff. Some people get stuck on paranoid mode and don't realize that what's illegal in one place or another generally isn't even getting a passing comment here. A few girls hired for repairs stumbled on a hidden chamber, set off a dozen or so alarms, and I've spent this entire time either knocking out idiots or talking down the not-quite-so trigger-happy. What were they smuggling? Weapon components. There are a few pieces to plasma rifles where certain polities require all of the legal ones to have a kill switch, meaning a popular mod is to have basically 2 of them, so the weapon registers as having the kill switch and it even working. Then the flick of some hidden switch or the press of a hidden button, and presto. Gun that works regardless of what the law says. As you can guess, they go for quite a bit, but people are really jumpy about them being found. I can understand, but are you all right with them being smuggled? There are roughly 30 polities within a few weeks' travel that have a ban like that. And to be frank, all of them either have much bigger problems or deserve people getting around their bans. Problems such as, it's a turbulent galaxy, sir. You're asking me to summarize the political issues of 30 different states, each one with a population rivaling, if not surpassing, that of China. The smallest ones are stations like Octar Spin here. The biggest is no less than 20 systems in size with a total of 18 primary worlds, 32 colonized moons, 8 colonized planetary rings, 12 stations of a similar size to this one, and 6 nomadic fleets, I think. And Octar Spin doesn't have such restrictions? It's not so much a restriction as an understood consequence. You can have whatever toy you like on the spin, but if you start breaking it with that toy, then you go out the airlock without an EVA suit. I think it works better myself, but I'm admittedly biased. I see. But please, a summary would be nice. What bigger problems do they have? Or how do they deserve this? Well, that big one I mentioned has an active civil war going on due to massive amounts of corruption, but the revolution is already falling to its own corruption, so it looks like we have a massive wildfire spreading there that is going to need to burn itself out. A few stations are downright abusive to their workers with ruinous contract clauses just barely north of slavery, and people need a way to tell them where to stick it. I can't imagine plasma weapons are easy to come by in such places. They're not, but these modifications can be put into plasma tools as well, letting them being converted from mining torches and welders into energy weapons. It's also one of the harder to craft components, meaning that a skilled engineer or mechanic can put together the rest of the weapon around these parts. An interesting turn of events, although I do have some further questions. Go ahead. Your mother was telling me about the first noteworthy day she was here with us. We were at the part when the mercenary fleet was beaten back, and you were taken to medical with a stomach wound. Care to finish things up? Certainly, but memorable days are memorable because unusual things just keep happening. So it was just getting started. OOCS, Into a Wider Galaxy, Part 167, The Buzz on the Spin. Now you were at the point where the mercenary fleet was literally torn apart with 3 ships allowed to escape as an example. I had taken a gut shot, but thankfully it wasn't too severe, and with galactic-level medical technology, I was out and unscarred within 15 minutes. Getting past my wives after that took up 45. Observer Wu turns to look outside and sees a tiny bee woman point at him, then draw a line across her neck. The threat is clear, but also comedic, considering that she's also clearly gotten her weapon of choice stuck on a spike. He turns away, and out of the corner of his eye, he can see another Sharbus woman buzzing up to help her untangle it. I believe you, Observer Wu says simply. So back to your unusual day so I can better understand what a normal day is, or rather, what it takes for a day to be unusual. In my normal days, I get involved to 4 to 6 fights on average, threaten to kill a half-dozen people, and see the movement of several billion in hard coin. Electronic transfers are easily in the trillions. That much money gets moved around? This station is effectively an independent nation with few restrictions or regulations on how to earn money. The amount of wealth that flows through here is astronomical. Even if not a single atom of the metals that it's constantly harvesting was sold and instead freely provided to keep the station repaired, with the remaining simply vanishing into nothingness, then this station would still make that level of sheer wealth through the station's share, which compared to the taxes of a proper nation are effectively non-existent. A lot of people come here to make a nest egg by building cash and then leaving to pursue their goals elsewhere. The station commander likes it that way. Keeps profits sky high, popularity stays in its orbit, but trouble is left behind as people do their nonsense elsewhere. I would like to quickly speak of her before we continue. What is she like? Menacey? She's bored. She's been leading this station for so long that its cycles have no more interest to her. She can predict everything that can happen through sheer experience to such a degree that nothing has her interest anymore, which is why she's grooming the station staff, including myself, to help in a transfer of power to her chosen heiress. A niece, I'm told. Basically, this station is her family's moneymaker, with one member maintaining it and keeping it prosperous. The rest of the family follow their dreams and ambitions, and Menacey has put in her time, and then some. So she's soon to retire and is just numb to everything. A leader being numb to day-to-day decisions and activities is not a good thing. Hence her retiring. She recognizes the danger and is working to pass the torch before apathy kills her or the station. After that, she apparently has a 4,000-planet brothel crawl to get to. A brothel crawl? Observer Wu says, and Hoagie just nods. A brothel crawl? Considering the biology and psychology of most alien races, including her own, that's a hell of a thing to do, Hoagie says. Of course that could be deliberate, like an emotional version of slamming your head against the wall to try and wake up or think about something else. Well, that's a terrifying topic of conversation I'm going to have to try avoiding. Thank you. You're welcome, sir. Now, after the hour-long delay I had to getting back into the fight. Already over? Hoagie asks, and Demon just cackles at him. No need to be rude. Well, that's what happens when you let yourself get shot. You know how rare kinetic weapons are. I wasn't expecting it, and my armor held up. I barely got cut. You still came out worse than me, Demon notes and then staggers as Hoagie kicks him in the back of the knee. Hey! Oh, relax. I still came out worse than you after all. Oh, ha, ha. Now we need to worry about scrapping this, Demon begins before the entire ship shakes. Status report? The hell just happened? No idea. Axiom is spiking near the engines of the ship for some reason, and the ship jumps and both men are staggered as they try to keep their balance. That whole ship just fucking jerked upwards. It just shifted a dozen fucking kilometers. The engines? Axiom spike, but negative heat. The ship was just... Everything jumps the other way, and the inertial dampeners can't keep up with whatever the hell just happened, as the entire room shifts, and both men and all station citizens find themselves on what was a wall. Then it stops, and everyone hits the floor. Literally. The hell is going on? Demon demands as he and Hoagie are already moving. It's in the engines, so let's find the hell out, Hoagie replies as they rush down the hallway and the ship jumps around several more times, leading to them free-falling on more than one occasion before finally reaching the engine room. The door opens and one glowing alpha woman is strangling another as they both pull in all the Axiom in the area. Hoagie and Demon share a look, then nod. Get other people out. I'm gonna null them, Hoagie promises, and Demon nods again as he rushes out, using his size and incredible strength to climb the hallways and keep himself going, even as the ship jerks from one direction to another as the women fight. All right, you two. This is your one friendly warning to calm the hell down before I calm you down by force, Hoagie calls to the two furious women who have been knocked out of their temporary stare down, and are now trading blows that, when they miss and are not dispelled, rock the entire ship and force him to grab onto a guardrail to avoid being thrown around like a toy. They're screaming at each other in a language he recognizes as an Alpha One, but can't understand a word of it, even if they weren't screeching at the top of their lungs at speeds that an auctioneer would consider excessive. Then one tackles the other into the ceiling, and the entire ship lurches so hard it's like the gravity jumped to 20 times standard force. "Fuck this," Hoagie grunts out before channeling Axiom to induce null, only for both pissed-off Alfar to tackle into him to disrupt it before going back to pounding each other with the force of sledgehammers directly over him. He tries again, and it's dispelled again, and he sighs. Okay, so trying to use Axiom in the middle of this Axiom brawl is just not going to work. Then they hit the floor and everything jumps, and he's sent careening into one Alpha who refuses to harm him and puts him to the side before rushing back at the other, who also hesitated. "Really? I really have to use the man card to get you people to stop? God fucking damn it. You know you really need to cut back on the swearing. It's crude, and it makes you seem like an idiot who can only use the naughty words to emphasize things. Mother, I'm military. The F word alone can form any and every part of a sentence and be perfectly understandable," Hoagie replies. "That doesn't make it right or good." Janet scolds him. "Now get back to your story, young man. It's not polite to leave people hanging, as it were. Mom, you're old enough to understand the slang and young enough to use it. You don't have to emphasize it with air quotes." "So you're saying your mom is hip to hang?" Janet teases, and Hoagie sighs. "I set myself up for that." Yes, you did. "Back to it, darling," Janet says, patting him on the head. At this point, things were pretty clear as to what had to be done. It wasn't fun, and it wasn't dignified. But grabbing onto one of the brawling Alfar, hanging on and getting in the way, forced the two to stop brawling. Then as they try to gently pry him off, he moves and has an arm around each of them, with himself between. "Okay, so do you two want to explain just why in the hell you think hitting each other so hard the ship thrashes in space is a smart thing to do?" "Because I just can't see it." They both start talking at once, and he gives them both a shake. "Okay, one at a time. People read from left to right in my language, so we're starting on the left," he says, and there's immediate protest from the one on the right. "Have you never heard of game theory, girl? By going second, you get to counter whatever points or arguments she makes." "Then I want to go second." The girl on the left protests, and he looks up in frustration. "No, you're going first, so make it good. Why are you two fighting like this?" he demands, and both start talking. Another shake in there, quiet for a moment. Then they both lean out and glare at each other. He tries to dispel the forced teleport. He really does. But they're too skilled, too fast, and clearly too used to each other, as his effort to stop them is swept away instantly, and he is suddenly somewhere. "Sector 8? He asks as he looks around and then pulls out his communicator. "Control, this is Eastman." "What happened? Your signal is in Prayer Town. We've got 2 brawling adepts on the damn cargo ship, and they're skilled enough that I can't just conjure null. Send someone with a damn caster gun, black round, and drop the stupidity before they slam that thing into the spin in their pointless brawl." "Why are they brawling?" "No idea, but they're hitting hard enough that the jerking of the ship is when they miss each other." "Ah, fuck, all right, we're moving. Get out of there before someone decides you're too vulnerable." "Look, jokes aside, the only thing I avoid here is attention. I'm a hive husband. By their metrics, I'm doing my manly duty on top of protecting the home my family's growing in. They have nothing on me," Hoagie says as he starts walking. The whole district is already in an uproar due to the Gathara men that had been found and evacuated. But that doesn't mean that he won't be unnoticed. He walks with purpose and makes his way towards the central elevator. Hopefully no one is so unoccupied as to. "Are you all right, young man? What are you doing out and about alone?" a Weaver Archna asks him. She's moderately pregnant and clearly of the Gravid faith. "Heading back is what?" "I got caught up between 2 adepts," he says, and she looks uncertain but otherwise doesn't comment. After all, if he's heading to safety, then she is bound by her faith to not only let him, but stop anything that would get in his way. And seeing as how she watches him rush up to a service elevator and show his credentials to get in without issue, she has nothing to complain about. Meanwhile, as this was happening, one of the Undaunted was rushing down through the unwielding bunker and passing by Demon as he keeps people well away from the brawling adepts. The caster gun is of a more simple make and only takes one bullet, but it's a robust design and everything is locked in place and fired off. The sensation of disrupted axiom hits first, followed by all the lights going out and everything becoming a silent, echoing void. The undaunted man pushes off the wall in the now zero-gravity hallway and slowly crosses the doorway, grabbing the edge of it as he pulls out a headlamp and slips it on. The press of a button later, and he can see the two shocked and barely breathing Alfars slowly tumbling through the air. He doesn't have much time, so he makes a calculation and jumps off the wall and slowly dives through the air at one of them. Axiom's scrambling manacles come out and are slipped on her before he lets the momentum carry them both to the far wall. He pushes down to dive to a walkway and then leaves her floating just over it as he uses the guardrail to angle himself and dive for the other. It's another catch, manacle, and then reorient for him to angle for the walkway, only for the gravity to return as the axiom settles. Thankfully, he's only a few meters over the walkway and manages to catch himself and brace her fall. "All right, girlie, this is going to be a good explanation, I hope," he says as he walks around the room and heads for the second adept with the one he just restrained, hoisted over his shoulder like a sack of potatoes. Who in particular was this? Hoops. Hoops? Duncan Gonzalez, an Argentinian undaunted. He plays some basketball and his name has Dunk in it. I swear the reason for your nicknames grow more inane by the day. A lot of guys have nicknames just because they don't otherwise have nicknames, Hoagie says, and Observer Wu sighs. Oh, come on, that's not even weird. No, but it is inane. OOCS Into a Wider Galaxy, Part 168. The Buzz on the Spin. Janet hums as she goes into the back and starts up a machine. Observer Wu raises an eyebrow at that. Mom has had a few ideas on how to make cooking easier back on Earth. Unfortunately, Rube Goldberg-style machines generally aren't very efficient, but with Axiom to do away with the need for power sockets, keeping things from breaking, and letting her keep a few parts hovering in the air. I understand, but to what end has she made this device? Mass production of honey candies. There were some interesting tastes developed by my wives. Many of them have already laid eggs, others are currently gravid, and for some reason, pickle juice mixed in is something that tastes delicious to them now. So yeah, hard honey candies with pickle juice mixed in, Hoagie explains, and Observer Wu makes a face. Pickle juice honey candies? A niche item, you can be certain. They're apparently at their best when the insides are still kind of gooey, and I hate them. I don't touch them. But my girls who are with egg, they love them. Then for about 2 weeks after they still love them, then the day after they can't stand them. It's odd, Hoagie says before shrugging. That's, not too unusual. They must be missing some nutrients they need otherwise. Yes, now, after that deal with the adepts. Are problems with adepts common? Yes and no. They're very powerful and they know it. But that doesn't make them bulletproof, and those that use effects to become bulletproof have all but 1 or 2 methods fail against a tri-tight sniper shot. Unless they've reinforced themselves to the degree that bullets bounce off, or have something hard between them and the bullet, then they're easily dealt with. Hoagie explains before withdrawing a magazine with the topmost bullet having a sky blue sheen rather than the reddish color of copper. This fits into my main rifle, and if I can pace myself, I can send each one into the bullseye on the target from just about anywhere in the same section. Have you killed adepts? A few. More often, I've acted as distraction and had to wipe blood and brain matter off myself, which is another disturbing trend. You're very comfortable with death. Yes, you trained me to be a soldier and sent me out with all the tools to be a good one, a very good one. I won't say it wasn't horrifying at first, but I had discipline and focus enough to keep going afterwards, and unlike what some people say, killing gets very, very easy. Easier still when you know that many of the people you're doing harm to have done horrible things. But killing gets easier. I understand. Still, it needed to be noted for the record, Observer Wu says, and Hoagie nods. Right. Well, to get back to things. I had just arrived back in administration after the adepts were getting a timeout in tri-tight cubes. He's not on the bridge for even 5 seconds before his communicator starts going off. Eastman, there are numerous captains that want to speak. A lot of them are berthed in Sector 4 making this my problem. All right, I'm heading to my office, Hoagie says as he rushes in, dodging Kathy to her call of Uncle Sandwich. Hey, little girl, having a good day, I hope. I bumped my tail when we lost gravity. Oh no, did your dad kiss it better? Yup, good to hear. Now I need to get back to work. That little girl is so adorable, Janet gushes. Have you had her here? Observer Wu asks. Yes, but she's an Ikiyamaz, so she's a little girl from a people who generally only get up to your stomach at most. So she's maybe up to the lower thigh at the best of times, Janet says happily. Funny enough, though, she has no taste for cheeses. But I need to cut her off if there's a big bowl of nuts and dried fruits. Otherwise, she can and will eat until her little tummy pokes out. Big guy wasn't too happy with that, ruined Kathy's dinner, Hoagie remarks. I didn't make that mistake twice, Janet defends herself. No one's angry. He just wasn't happy about it, Hoagie says. So I take it everyone's fond of the little girl? Oh yes, Hoagie says. Now, as I got to my office, I barely had time to sit down before the first humorless witch called me. Daniel. I said witch. Witch is not a slur. Just keeping you on your toes, Janet says, and he sighs. Anyways. Hello, Captain Hadria. You wish to speak with me. He does not let it be a question. I want one of the ships, she states. Have you or have you not already begun salvaging one of the hostile ships? He asks. No, one of the nearby ships grabbed it before we could. I'm not your nanny. I'm not your father, and neither is the station. You want one of the hostile ships, then you grab one before anyone else can, or take it from someone who already has. Just don't make it our problem, he says before terminating the link. He starts up the next one. Captain says Captain Morga from the Hefty Hall. That was either a boast or bait for a ship name. That stupid cargo hauler crashed into mine. No, it didn't. I was on that damn ship and I received no warnings about any form of impact. He replies and the call is terminated. There's always at least one. He sets up the next link and it's declared to be a Captain Lart on the Cruel Tide. Hello, this is the quartermaster of the Cruel Tide. We grab one of the gunships and there's still some hostile crew. If you want them, then there's a fee. And if we don't, what happens? I hear throwing them out airlocks is traditional in these parts. Tell you what, show your prisoners this conversation and the ones that surrender and promise to talk will take off your hand for a proper finder's fee. The rest you can do what you want with. They're going out the airlock. Have fun with that. Call me again soon, Hoagie says, and the quartermaster nods before ending the call herself. 10 minutes tops before I have at least half those girls in a cell. He accepts the next call and is looking a Tret woman in the face. And what do you want? I want the product I bought. It's on the way, unless you were not paying attention. You might have noticed that there was a small void battle not far from your ship. A little patience is all I need. My rental in the berth expires within 3 hours, and my product will take 4 to load. It's not here yet. Why in the actual hell have you cut the timing of things so stupidly close? Hoagie demands. How and why I do business is no concern of yours. What I want is a proper compensation for the lost business time and efficiency. Your little bit of drama has stalled me out, and now you're demanding money because you can't keep this area under your control. Lady, if you listen closely, you can hear the galaxy itself snickering at the very idea of us having plans. Put some fucking allowances in your planning, or you will snap in half, Hoagie tells her, and she glares at him. Now I need to know what berth you're at. I'm not going to give out information to a random piece of office eye candy. Get me your supervisor, you damn secretary. Watch your tone, lady. I have a limit of patience, and less for those who insult and demean me and mine. He warns her, and her eyes narrow at him. When it comes to the section of the station you're attached to, only the station master outranks me, and she no longer cares. Which means that the only thing you'll get out of her is a knife with extra twist to it. Spare yourself the grief and drop the ego. Don't try to lie your way out of this, boy. No one with any sense will let a pup like you out of their sight in a place like this. You're clearly just a... He terminates the connection and moves to the next one. Miss Dumbass can pay all the fees if she's going to be rude. Captain Armay of the Horoco, what is wrong? I've been given the runaround on the alert systems on whether we're clear to depart now or not. I need confirmation. Can we leave safely? Hang on a moment. I'm going to double check, Hoagie says, turning to another monitor and tapping some things on the interface. You're clear. Get out of here. Yes, sir, she says, and the link terminates. Then another one opens automatically, and he's looking at the tread again. He glances to the naming. Captain Julie of the Jewel. You will stop intercepting my call to the... He terminates the call. Then it reactivates. You will. The next time you force a link through, I'm going down to your ship myself to beat some manners into you, he says after muting her side, and she glares at him. Then he terminates the link again. It reactivates, and before she can say a thing, he turns it off and deactivates the console. He then leaves the office, giving Kathy a ruffle of her hair, and starts heading back to Sector 4. He has some manners to teach. You threaten violence in response to bad manners? Observer Wu demands. Don't tell me you've never felt the urge to attack an entitled lunatic, Hoagie replies. Yes, but I don't follow through with it. That would be barbaric. Well, unfortunately, I don't have much choice in the matter. My position as the head of Sector 4 makes me essentially a mafia boss in the area. If I'm openly and brazenly disrespected, I have to respond, and if I don't, then people will try to challenge my power, which will destabilize the area, get people hurt, and far, far more, Hoagie says with a sigh. So if things start going down in this sector, I respond to it. Because if I don't, then more will come. Chief Enforcer more like. You do, after all, answer to the station master. True, very true, Hoagie concedes. Anyways, back to things. I was returning to Sector 4. By the time he gets to the airlock connecting the Jewel to the rest of Octran's spin, there's a small force of berserkers behind him. The buzzing of their wings is distinctly pissed off. After all, he still hasn't had time to repair his compromised armor, only switch out the damaged part from undamaged ones. His override works, and the airlock forcibly opens. He walks into the ship without a word and pulls out a copy of the blueprints he glares at. A turn to the right for the nearest lift and up to the bridge, which is on top of this stupid ship and a damn target for anyone and everyone with above-weapons accuracy or gunners. The lift door opens, and it's to a wall of lasers pointed right at him, with Captain Julie behind them all. He moves forward. I warned you. They fire, and his brand protects him. He has it extended to his clothing, so they're just beams of light for now. Saturation over a few minutes might be dangerous. Might. There's a series of bangs as the berserkers unleash their modified plasma attacks to scatter the security crew like bowling pins around him, and his strides break into a sprint. Julie has only enough time for her eyes to widen in shock before his fist crashes into her stomach, and she lets out a cry of distress. His blow lifts her off her feet and sends her crashing into the wall, where she catches herself and pulls out a weapon at a commendable speed. But he's already in her personal space as she activates the plasma sword, and he holds her hand over it in a crushing grip. The warning about your tone was not for my sensibilities or personal taste. It was for your safety. We could have done this the easy way. I was about to give you a free 3 hours to have all the time you needed. But you had to be proud, you had to be impatient, and now you have to hurt, he says before driving a knee into her side and causing her to crumple a bit. He then starts squeezing the hand under his own and brings his second to bear. She screams as he crushes her hand and the plasma sword under it. He then hurls her like a rag doll at her rising security staff and points. Get that idiot to the medical bay and see to her hand. You have an extra 3 hours now, and if you were polite earlier, you would have gotten it without the broken hand, he says before turning around and walking back to the elevator. Let's go, girls. I don't know if their stupid can be contagious, but I don't want to risk it. The expression of pain, awe, and fear as the lift door closes is satisfying in ways he feels shameful about. You admit that you like the power? It's a heady drug. Breaking the will of someone who was in your face and disrespecting you is an incredible feeling, but it's not a good thing. No, it's not, Observer Wu states as he considers. Crushing someone's hand with raw gripping power is a brutal example to make. Yes, and it's not one that needs repeating or is soon forgotten. By being outright savage to the people too stupid to back down, I raise the threshold for how much stupidity is needed to actually ignore my warnings, meaning less people get hurt in the long run. That is an appalling excuse. You admit to liking it. I do and I have, but I don't seek it out. I'm not looking for excuses to hurt people. You could have talked her down. I was attempting to, and she only disrespected me further and further, necessitating the use of intimidation tactics and brutality. I'm glad you understand. My first career was in law enforcement. I know just how much of it is a compromise in the end. Did you get people to safety, sir? This isn't about me, Mr. Eastman. This is about you. But I did. I did many times. Good man, Daniel says, and Observer Wu nods. OOCS in a Wider Galaxy, Part 169. The Buzz on the Spin. The door opens and a swarm of Charbies rush in. They're speaking quickly in a language that Wu does not understand, but the tone is all over the place. Something wrong? Observer Wu asks and gets roughly 20 sets of eyes glaring at him. Family affairs in the hive. Excuse me, I need to be there for this, Hoagie says, rising up. Is it time? Janet asks breathlessly. It is. Hoagie replies, and she lets out a beaming smile. Janet then rushes into the back and asks the women there to hold down the shop for a time, and then rushes out with everyone else. Well, that's probably important. One of Wu's bodyguards states out loud as he watches the crowd disappear. No doubt, Observer Wu states before leaning to the side and raising his eyebrows. The area is suspiciously empty of bee women. What? The Charbi are downright omnipresent in Sector 4. Usually, the snicked woman at the bar notes as she hops off her stool and opens the door. She glances around and shrugs. Not a one in sight. It's another weird time. So this has happened before? Yes, but more often recently. Since Mr. Eastman arrived on the station. Oh, some eggs must be hatching. No wonder all the Charbis are gone. The hives are all related, so if it's not their own daughters, then it's their nieces or granddaughters being born, the Snicked exclaims. That would do it. I suppose there's nothing to do but wait so we can finish things, Observer Wu notes. At least the chairs are comfortable, sir, one of his guards notes. His leap takes him over a trap, and a twist in the air has him avoid a nearly invisible wire. The triggering mechanisms of the traps are mechanical and not axiom-based, so while the payload can be easily spotted, they're distracting from the triggering mechanisms, usually thin threads that are easily snapped. But he has to angle his landing and use his fingers to avoid setting off a few pressure plates, and axiom energy starts moving, and he starts moving too. Then he sees it. Tiny lenses. There must have been a laser in a spectrum he can't see in. He broke the beam. A tripwire finer than even the dental floss he's avoiding, or the spider silk they're distracting from. The payload is a massive mount of goop, and he goes UP as it triggers the other traps in a dominoes effect. Had he stayed on the ground, he'd be a flashworked statue in every neon color, glitter-covered and with numerous pictures snapped of it. He catches the next level of trap between his feet and bends backwards, hard to dodge the continuation of things. He pulls himself up and starts to climb in a dizzying spiral to avoid getting tagged. None of the traps are lethal, and none of them are designed in malice, which is screwing with the battle instinct he had pounded into him. He reaches the top and leaps to the side with his arms and legs like an animal, and then rolls before sliding into a ditch and shooting down it, and then leaping out before the entire thing fills with bright pink paint, and then flips through the air and lands with his heels together. You know you could have just knocked on the front door, Yzma chides him. Well, where's the fun in that? Harold asks, and she scoffs. It's good to see you again, little man. I see you've had a time of it. Lost a lot of weight. Yeah, it turns out I was developmentally accelerated rather than printed off at an adult stage, meaning I needed to swap my parts out to rot, he notes. Not a weight loss program I would recommend, Yzma notes. Why would the women of the galaxy need a weight loss program? Does it not all go to the breasts and rear? It does, and when a woman can't get through a door or fit in normal clothing, she has a problem, Yzma notes. A strange little gap in your knowledge. I run in strange circles. How was the rest of your hunting trip? It was mostly over by that point, although Giselle coming out of her shell was a wonderful thing to happen. Where is she? The next sector over, she's getting mass-produced explosives. I may have to poke my nose in on that, Harold notes. Oh, she's fine. We've already bothered some of the local undaunted into poking their own noses in. Oh, fair enough. So care to hear about what I've been up to? I'd love to, Yzma says. But first, I'd like you to meet someone. Technically, two someones, but one hasn't hatched yet. You just embody the term mother, don't you? Harold asks as he follows Yzma into a secluded area. This whole section of the deck was like living in an underground forest. Lush with life, but enclosed and very, very dark. Of course, you know, I was a fairly rabid gravid when I was really young. It wasn't until one of my sons refused to speak to me that I eased up on it. It's a standard I hold myself to. That's where faith is best, when it's something you hold to yourself and don't force on others. Did you? He was taken from me forever before I could reconnect. Yzma admits and pauses. I'm sorry. Thank you, but there's nothing you could have done. It happened thousands of years ago. It still isn't something unworthy of pity or sympathy. Perhaps, as terrible as it was, it did make me a better mother. I just wish it didn't take tragedy at that scale to slap the folly out of me, she says to herself. Still, regrets are for quiet moments of contemplation, and certainly not when there are guests and friends about. Now it's time for you to meet one of Yoru brothers. So you did adopt one? I did. This little big man was one of the physically oldest before being de-aged, and his growth halted. But shh, it's nappy time, she says, and he nods before she gently opens what appears to be a doorway between a gnarled tree and a cave wall. The woman's home really does resemble something out of an old fairy tale. She creeps in as quiet as a shadow. Harold makes a point of only being half so loud as he follows. The room has a soft green glow from phosphorescent mushrooms, and in the center is a crib and an incubator with a large leathery egg inside. The mild humming of the machine is only slightly drowned out by the snoring baby boy. His cherubic cheeks and softly curling hair adds to the impression of utter innocence. He looks photo-ready, even down to the tiny tongue sticking out of his mouth ever so. Yes, that's a Jameson, all right. Kidnap bait before he even reaches the age of a kid. Must have been a challenge getting the little guy used to you at first, Harold whispers. It was worth it. Yzma answers just as softly as she bends down and kisses the little boy on the brow. And who's the father of this one? He asks, gesturing to the egg she laid. Horace Blue. It was a legal purchase. Well, damn. You know, if you're trying to get the most complicated family knot possible, you're doing a He looks down and decides against swearing. A heck of a job. Oh, there is better and more amusing in royal lines. If you really want to see a few mind twisters, look to the older royal families and wait till you see the loops in the line. Loops in the line. It's the polite way to say marrying an ancestor, she says, and his jaw drops. Of course, by the time that's normally allowed, enough generations have passed that they're genetically distant enough for the risk to be low. But it's always a mind-bender when it happens. Holy crow, that's incredibly insane, Harold notes before thinking. What's the craziest you've ever witnessed? A royal husband having his great-great-granddaughter having to share the bed with her great-great-granddaughter and her great-great-granddaughter. I'm a little terrified to ask how the children turned out. No one knows. The family was overthrown and put to the blade not long after, she says, and he stares. I wasn't involved, but I was watching with interest from the sidelines. Just the amount of history you must have seen is... I often find myself in the middle of some pretty crazy things. I'm just there, happily hunting and spending time with my little babies. And then there's some huge, heavy drama the next forest glade over, and there's talk of coups, royal succession, death and murder, and by the time I get all my children back and a good seat to watch the silliness, it's usually over except the cleanup. Things happen fast when they get to the knife part of politics. I'd imagine so. It usually works that way for Herbert as well. Everything calm, business as usual, then someone has something sharp or explosive make its appearance, And the excitement is over and done with in 10 or so minutes. But the cleanup can take 10 months. That's politics, boring until it's not. That's a lot of things, actually, Yzma says with a smile. Unless you learn to love the wait, if you develop an appreciation for peeping or spying on people, then spy work is, surprise, surprise, quite fun, Harold says, and Yzma giggles. True enough, she says before gesturing for them both to leave the room. Does Horace know? Herbert asks. I did send him a message, but beyond that, he's likely to have little influence in the child's life. Although, from what I can tell, it's a human girl, Yzma says with a smile. Oh, right, that funny quirk of the family. Funny indeed, Yzma says with a smile. Now let's get back to where my girls are entertaining your wives so I can tell them about all the little mistakes you made. What? You were so busy dodging the traps you ignored the cameras. The point wasn't the cameras, the point was the traps, he protests. Actually, it's security, so the traps weren't the point. It was the cameras. Don't do word games with me, I got through clean. Right in front of me, you don't think that's a penalty? No, Herbert insists. Let's see what they have to say, Yzma challenges. Yes, let's. Janet comes back almost skipping and with a big smile on her face. Everything turn out well? Observer Wu asks. He's halfway through a breakfast special with orange juice that's so well done that when his eyes are closed, he can fool himself into thinking he's back on Earth. Oh yes, it was wonderful, she answers. So what was it? Are you allowed to say? I'm afraid not. However, it's just good news all around, Janet says, bustling around. And don't worry about your tab. The day is wonderful enough to not worry about it. Considering that your son is the hive husband of one of the major food producers, I'd say that it's not much of a ding on your finances either way, Observer Wu says, and she nods. So what are they naming the new grandbabies? Any of them a Janet? There's already a... Janet pauses and gives him an even look. That wasn't fair. No, and I apologize for that. You're going to be paying your tab proper now. Worth it, Observer Wu says, and she sighs. You know, sometimes it's an absolute frustration to deal with a smarter, more observant man, Janet says, and Observer Wu smirks as he takes a sip of his orange juice. You still need the rest of the story, don't you? I do. We had a ship full of refugees from a species that he hadn't met before, a fleet of mercenaries that would drag them back into slavery, 2 adepts brawling, a ship captain being a fool, and then... What? Well, next he had a quick meal here with me and his wives. It's quite a thing to have an entire swarm of bee women working the kitchen and bringing in food for it all. Still, if someone wants to cook for me, then I'm happy to have some. Even if they do like their sugar too much and don't add enough butter or salt to anything. Butter and salt? It's the secret of most restaurants. Butter and salt in far greater quantities than you'd expect, she says happily. Even this? Is it human grade? She asks, glancing at his meal. Yes. Then yes, their eggs were cooked in butter and salted. There's salted butter on the toast, and of course the process of making bacon and sausages involves salt. We humans are addicted to salt and fats from first to last, and if you want food to taste amazing, add it, she says, and he considers. Bit of food science for you. That does explain a fair amount, but not what I'm looking for. After his dealing with the captain and then a light and early lunch with you, what happened next? A child killer, Janet says, and Observer Wu's eyebrows go up. Okay, that is going to need some explanation. Do you mean someone who resembled a child was the killer? There was a killer whose victims resembled children? Or were there actual children involved? Technically, yes, Janet says. Ma'am, he says in a warning tone, do you want a summation or do you want to hear how things happen? Yes, and in that order, Observer Wu states. It was a Maytax serial killer who had overused a healing coma to appear to be a child of their own species. Their victims were similar short species that had been de-aged. Technically, none of them were children. Biologically, all of them were, and at no point in their lives were they taller than children. A child killer, Janet says. Okay, that's a much more insane but reasonable thing to hear about. Less someone targeting the innocent, and more a group of extra small midgets with one of them being a murderer. Still horrible, but not as bad as children being attacked. Sorry, I couldn't resist, Janet says, and he gives her an unimpressed look. She lets off a slight chuckle then. My son is, I get it. His humor has rubbed off on you. You want to hear it go dark, listen into the nurses and doctors in a hospital comforting each other about a problem. Or the gossip in a police station about the state of crime, Observer Wu says with his hands up. Or teachers about the academic futures of children or fire departments about the fire safety. Janet says, You've heard a few? Near lifelong waitress here. We hear all the gossip when the board wants to talk around a meal and not in the office. I believe you. Now, as to this unusual day your son had, well, after lunch he got a call on his communicator. Hello, he asked the device even as he places a stack of plates on the counter with his other hands. No, that's not good. Give me the address again. All right, I'm on my way. What's going on? About 4 reports of a smell of blood in the storage area near the docking ring. I gotta go. There may have been a stabbing. He answers before giving her a hug and then makes a strange-looking gesture where he slowly walks through the charby with them all quickly brushing against his hair with their antenna. Then he's out and gone. His jump off the platform takes him down dozens of levels, and a hop off another one takes him the rest of the way down. He repeats the number he was given and then takes a left towards the area indicated. Shit, that does smell like blood. A quick pat to his armor where he replaced the plating, and he starts weaving through storage units, sniffing the air, and heading to where the scent is stronger and stronger until, oh shoot, he swears as he sees the tiny blue-skin corpse. There's no point checking for vitals. A massive gash and a puddle of blood that big can mean only death for someone so small. He brings out his communicator. We have a metak, unknown gender, very young, killed through a gash at the base of the neck that proceeds down through the collarbone and opens several major veins right next to the heart. If I would guess the age, I would say prepubescent, possibly younger. I'm not overly familiar with medic development. I am now going to check the corpse for any form of remaining ID. He then puts the communicator in broadcast mode and tucks it into his breast pocket as he begins gently tapping at the pockets of the tiny body. On the third location, he finds something hard and gently pries it out with 2 fingers. It's a tiny clamshell case that he opens up. On one half is a series of cards, and the other contains a compressed storage space for coins. The ID is for one Shelley Tierwing, age 547. A note states that she spends her time in a prepubescent form. There is a significant amount of coins still on hand. This was not a simple mugging gone wrong. Something like this would have been taken. Can any of you give me confirmation on this? Keep your shirt on, Hoagie. I'm getting the results now. Tierwing is a minor celebrity in several circles, and this is not going to look good for her to turn up dead here. She's not a galaxy-breaking celebrity, but she's in a fair number of commercials and generally serves as a child character in multiple movies and television shows. If what I'm getting about her net worth is correct, she was probably knifed while heading from Sector 5 to Sector 3. And then died here in Sector 4. I'm going to start scanning the area, see if anything turns up, Hoagie says as he pulls out a black light and starts slowly sweeping it across the area to spot anything he otherwise wouldn't. All right, I've got a bit more information. There is some scandal in Tierwing's life. She's recently taken a hiatus from her work for security reasons. She's estranged from her twin sister and apparently on the outs with most of her family. She's taken her hiatus here? Hoagie asks. Hey, we've got a solid reputation in the nearby empires. It's like going to crime-ridden tropical nation that has amazing drinks and tourism. God damn it, we're a banana republic. And you're one of the chief enforcers. Aren't you proud? Do remember that I'm looking into ways to bitch slap people over a phone call. Cool, think you can send a sucker punch via email? God, that would be so much fun. Hello, we've got a hit. Sadie Tierwing, the estranged twin, is on the station, staying in Sector 3. Looks like she's in for the long haul, too. She's starting a job as a bouncer in the Falling Coin Casino, and she's paid first and last for an apartment in the upper section of Sector 3. So did Shelley come here to... Hoagie cuts himself off as there's a sudden long streak of pressed out, not blood being forced to the side. He brings out a chemical scanner and holds it close to the previously invisible marking. I don't understand cloning fluid. What? Did someone kill her and try to clone her? Kill a clone? Did a clone kill her? This doesn't make sense. It could be coincidence. You're in a storage area and cloning is used all the time for a variety of reasons. Possible. From the spread, a bit of the fluid was leaking from a tank, and it must have flowed into the path of a repulsor for a pallet, giving us a trail. Send a crew to this body to start cleaning things up. Make sure we're respectful. We need to salvage this. And make sure we have someone watching Sadie. She's either a suspect or a potential next target. Either way, eyes on her. I take that to mean you're on the trail? Freak, yeah, I am. Actually, 500 or not, this maniac just made me stare a tiny child's dead body in the eyes. I'm going to kick their asses so hard they're going to spit it up. Hoagie growls out as he follows the trail between warehouses and pulls out his hull cutter without activating it yet. All right, it's more likely a woman, but the point comes across. Not in the mood for semantics. My kids are close to hatching and seeing a child butchered. Not a child. Calm down before you kill an innocent person. Admin warns him, and he takes a deep breath. Good man, breathe in and... Smells like a hospital, Hoagie says before sniffing around and then coming up to a blank wall. He looks back the other way to confirm that there should be a door here. He taps the wall with the hilt of his hull cutter, and the ringing noise is distinctly different from what it should be. Hidden door. There's gotta be a leak or a vent nearby too. Otherwise you wouldn't get that hospital smell, Admin notes. Exactly what I was thinking, Hoagie says before he tucks away the black light and places his freed-up palm on the wall. He sends a pulse of axiom through and snorts. Try tight lacing walls, someone's being sneaky, and if someone's pulling this shit in my sector, then it simply doesn't fly. He pushes the hull cutter through the door mechanisms and carves it in the frame of the reinforced bulkhead, worthy door clean out of the warehouse wall, and steps through. Housekeeping, he calls inside. It's way more aggressive than he intended and came out as a battle cry. Did he tell you that? Observer Wu asks. He's not even remarking on her censoring the swearing. He did, Janet confirms. Dude, really? Admin asks him. Really? Hoagie says as he holds up the hull cutter to shed light into the dark warehouse. There are rows and rows of tanks with half-grown figures inside them. We may have a cloning serial killer on the station. The axiom readings are indicating stasis energy not far from you. Both left and right, Admin says, and he turns and walks between two tanks to see. Is that our murder victim? It may be. Kidnap someone and cover up the kidnapping by murdering a clone? Hoagie considers as he walks up to the copy of Shelley Tierwing, naked and lying with her arms crossed over her chest like a mummy in a small pod. There are markers for that, though. But no one would check for that if the death looks legit, and it does look legit. They left the coin and ID, Hoagie says. Get the cleanup crew to check for them. If someone knocked her out, put her clothes on a clone, and then murdered the clone, then it's as neat as a kidnapping gets. Yeah, but useless for ransom. There are a lot more reasons to kidnap someone than mere money, and whoever's pulled this shit has money, Hoagie says as he starts walking past more and more stasis pods in the wall. Each one carries what looks like a child of a different species, but as he scans them, one after the other, they all come up as fully grown women who used healing comas to look like children. This is freaky, Admin notes. Try being down here. In fact, get the damn down here. I want backup, he says before something moves in his peripheral vision. He turns, but it's gone. Get down here yesterday, I'm not alone. Something screams and a shape blurs at him from directly behind. He turns and his hull cutter moves. Two halves of a naked child spark and crackle as they reveal themselves to be parts of a synthetic body. The entire laboratory suddenly lights up with shields over everything just before the two parts detonate and Hoagie is sent skidding back. His communicator is broken by shrapnel, but his grip on his hull cutter is good. He's only mildly cut up thanks to his armor, and otherwise just barely rattled. His ears are ringing, though. A surge of axiom and his cuts close, and the ringing stops as he scans the area. The force fields are protecting the cloning tanks, stasis pods, and the internals of the building, but also illuminating things. "Do you think this is cute?" he asks as he absently counts and spots that there are in fact 30 different women, all physically children, in stasis pods. He's willing to bet that each one is a murder victim and held here for some reason. "So when you said child killer earlier, you were just toying with me, weren't you?" Observer Wu accuses. "No, we just haven't gotten to that part yet. Unusual days are complicated ones, so there are a few more twists, such as the killer, their motivations, and a few more pieces. But the buildup is important. It's part of the story. Please don't try to pass real things off as a fairy tale." "Why wouldn't I? I'm the mother-in-law to a swarm of bees, and one of my dearest friends is a night black monster and mother of nations. I go swimming with mermaids every Tuesday and regularly have tea with giant spiders. I babysit mice on Thursday and gossip with rabbits every day of the week. I share recipes with bats and have advised both living math and machines on fashion. I live spinning among the stars in a home that was built around a flying mountain, long hollowed out by immortals in search of wealth. Upon their council sits my son in honor and glory as a high lord in service to the high queen. I'm living in a fairy tale. Fair enough, but I'm still not seeing a child killer if it's only clones." That came out by instinct. I've met clones. "Well, so long as you see where the fault lies. And if it came out of me by reflex after knowing Harold as long as I have, then how will they respond back on Earth? I'm going to have to make sure the legal rights and considerations of clones are near the top of the list of information. It's a technology we're perfecting on Earth, and I think it best if we learn from the ethical battles that have been had out here rather than suffer them ourselves." Observer Wu notes. "Is that the duty of an observer? My duty is to gather information and bring it back unbiased. The rights and responsibilities of clones and cloners are a part of that." "Makes sense to me. Just one more question before we continue," Observer Wu says, and Janet nods. He gestures for her to lean closer, and he looks concerned. She does. "Is this terribly story involving child rape?" "No, what our criminal was doing didn't go there, but it did go to disturbing places. It's already at a disturbing place with 30 women who have the bodies of small children held in stasis and surrounding a cloning lab where their copies are being made. What makes it more disturbing? Was our criminal a cannibal who had a taste for veal but didn't want to kill what he saw as a person? No, it was disturbing in a different way. And, oh, you're not allowed to let that just hang there. Keep telling me what happened." All right. Now my Daniel's focus was clear and strong as he was refining his axiom senses to narrow down where the person was. He could sense the life in the stasis pods and cloning tanks, but there was another that was subtly off, but still blurred by the shielding over everything backed by Tri-Tite. It blurred the whole area.